Alright, welcome back to our generic crafting tutorial series. In this fourth episode, we're going to be setting up our interaction event, our UI for that, and a few other values inside of our player character to kind of parse the interaction data. So let's go ahead and get right into it. The first thing I need to do is make an input action. I'm going to call this, input action, IA interact. We're going to make this held. It's going to be a digital bool. It's going to be hold. And if we expand our index value here, I'm going to set the hold threshold to be 3. That way it's going to take 3 seconds of holding this to actually interact with the item. You can set this to whatever you want, but for me it's going to be 3. That's our input action for interact. I'm going to add that to our action mapping, IMAC default. Let's add IA interact. I'm going to make this the E key. And I don't need any triggers or modifiers here, just the E key is enough for me. That's all we're going to do. Now we have our input action for interact. So we need 2 things here, right? We need our player, and we need some kind of user interface to show on the screen. So I'm going to open up my player controller, and we're going to make a new blueprint in the UI, or you can give this its own folder. I don't know why I did that. User interface, widget blueprint, much easier. User widget. Called W_interact. I tell you what, I am actually going to give this its own folder called interactions, because we're going to be making a another blueprint interface for interactions in UI later on. It's not necessarily attached to this widget for interact, but it will go in the same folder. So we're going to have our widget interact here. I'm going to have this screen size fill screen, and we are going to give a canvas panel. Now if you want to have this inside of your HUD, you don't necessarily need the canvas panel, but I don't really like mine inside the HUD. I like mine to kind of be standalone. Inside that canvas panel, we're going to give it a vertical box. I want this box to be centered, and we're going to make it like yay big, however big you want, really. A lot of the cosmetics here are going to be totally up to you. I'm just going to show you basically how I like to set mine up. Inside that vertical box, we're going to have a text. We're going to have a spacer, my little spacey boy. And we're going to have an overlay. Okay. And inside of that overlay, I have a progress bar. We're going to have some text. Now let's get all this set up properly. Our text block here is going to be auto, center, center, and we're going to make it a variable. Since we're making it a variable, let's call it text block message. This is going to be the interaction message that gets displayed. I'm going to have our spacer here. I'm just going to set this up to be 20. That way it has a little bit of spacing off of the top there. And then we have our overlay. Our overlay needs to be set to fill. Center, center is perfectly fine. Inside of that, we're going to have our progress bar, which needs to be a variable. And this progress bar is going to fill. So fill horizontally and fill vertically. So how we're going to do this here is we are actually going to get the style, and we are going to get the background image, and we're going to draw as a border. And then we're going to take, I don't know why I did that. So we're going to take that, we're going to search white square to use the engine's white square texture. That way it's not all like 50 million textures. And you can set the tint up however you want. I set mine up to be a little bit gray and a little bit transparent. It's kind of a personal preference for me. Same with our fill. Our fill is going to be kind of whatever you want that to be. We're going to do that as image as well. White square. We're going to make sure it is a border. And I'm going to make sure the tint is like purple. I don't think it's actually going to show up as that, but I'm just going to set that to purple. That way it's a little bit different. And we need our progress. So our progress is going to be bound. We're going to create a binding for the progress called get percent. Yeah, get percent is fine. And the last thing we need to do in here is take the text block. We're going to make it a variable. And we're going to call this press button. You don't exactly have to do this. I'm going to center it up. I'm going to say press E. And you're going to want to adjust this as needed if you're using game pads or multiple different controller types. You're going to have to set all that up. But that's all we're going to do here is just center it up and say press E. Make sure it's a variable. So here in our event graph, we are going to delete the pre-construct and the tick. Off of the event construct, we're going to run a branch. This branch is going to have a condition of can interact. B can interact. Well, that's going to be instance editable. Editable. And it doesn't need to be exposed on spawn. Oh, whoops. We also need to make sure our overlay itself is also a variable. Because we're going to use this can interact to hide or display the overlay itself and not the stuff inside of it. So set visibility off of false, so we cannot interact with this. Then the overlay needs to be hidden. And like I said, this isn't going to be exposed on spawn because we are going to have this widget basically always spawned into the world. Now, if you're constantly respawning it every single time that you need to interact, you can go ahead and expose this on spawn. You won't need to do this next part. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to have it always pretty much in the world, and we're going to just manually set a couple of values as needed. Okay, and how we're going to handle that is with a custom event. Called set interaction message. I'm going to get another text value here called message. And there's going to be string or text, whichever one you prefer. I'm going to go with string this time. I know I flip-flop around a lot on that. Again, if you're using string tables for languages, multi-language support, you'll probably want to make sure that everything is a string. So we're going to set string from this set interaction message. Make sure we pass in string. And we're going to set can interact through this as well on can interact. And we're going to be getting that from the player based on a bunch of different stuff, because this interaction is going to be very generic. So it's going to be for opening up the bank, opening up a chest, interacting with an item, all sorts of stuff, and the player is going to need to tell this whether or not it is possible to interact with it. So we need to do a couple of things off of true here. Actually, not a couple of things, just one thing. We're going to set the visibility of this to, if it's true, then we can interact, it's going to be visible. If it's false, we cannot interact, it's going to be hidden. I know that kind of defeats the purpose of this event construct. We really don't need this event construct here. I just noticed it kind of helps a little bit because this is going to be false by default. It should be false by default. So if for whatever reason the interact widget ends up on the screen, just by default, it'll set this to collapsed. Yeah, you really don't need this. This is probably never going to happen. Almost everything that happens in here is going to be through this set interaction message, which is going to set up these values. So we need one more thing in order to get the percent. We're going to go ahead and make that now. That way we can wrap up here. Custom event called update progress time. If I spell time right. Update progress time is going to have a float. New time. And we're going to use this for our held interaction. So basically how long we have held that button is going to slowly update this. I'm going to call that elapsed time. And we're going to need that elapsed time for the get percentage here, which is that function that we created for the progress bar to be linked. It's going to take elapsed time. Since we did 3 seconds, when we need to divide by 3. If you only did 1 second, you probably won't have to divide at all. If you did 2 seconds, you'll have to divide by 2. so on and so forth. You're probably gonna have to tinker with that a little bit. But that's gonna get the percentage based on the elapsed time that we've held for 3 seconds. So once we've held the button for 3 seconds, that percentage bar is going to be completely full, and we're going to interact. One more thing we need to do here is bind this text message to the message. So it doesn't actually have to be a variable, but we're going to bind that. This doesn't actually have to be a variable either, but like I said, if you are changing this based on different controller inputs, then you're going to need a variable to basically decide what it's going to say based on the current controller input. So that's all we're going to do for this example here. We're going to have our event construct, which is going to check if can interact is false and set the visibility of the overlay to hidden. Update the progress timer, which just sets a float for elapsed time, which goes into get percent, which is constantly being updated, and divided by 3 to get the percentage for the progress bar. And we're going to have set interact message, which is going to get called from the player controller when we want to set up the interaction widget with a message and whether or not we can interact, which is going to determine whether or not the overlay is visible. Okay, that is our interaction widget. So now in our player controller, we need to actually have a way to spawn that into the world and control it. So we need 3 custom events here for the interaction widget. First one's going to be called display interact widget. The second one's going to be called remove interact widget. And the third one's going to be called update interaction progress, or something along those lines, whatever you really want to call it. It doesn't matter too much what you call it. This is just going to be the event that updates the time that the button has been held for. So we're going to go add our always local, always do this local. Doesn't really matter if you're not doing multiplayer, but if you do, for whatever reason, end up making multiplayer, you're going to want this always local. We need to create our widget up here. W interact, promote that to a variable, and add it to our widgets category. So same thing we did with the HUD. We're going to get it is valid. If it is not valid, we're going to make it and set it. If it is valid, we're just going to go ahead and update it. And what we are going to update is going to be set interaction message. And we also need to update the progress time to 0. So we want to make sure that it's basically zeroed out every time that we display the new interact widget. And we want to add it to the player screen. Okay. That's all we really need to do here. So make sure that you're passing all this in. So either way, you're getting that valid widget. We're going to take our message and can interact, and we are going to make them input pins on this event. That way, when this event is called, all that stuff gets passed right on through. Okay, so pretty much the same as any other widget we're going to make in the game. Just going to add that up here, move it up a little bit, the way it's out of the way. Same thing with the remove interact widget. Just going to take interact widget, take the as valid, Control C, Control V, paste them down here. If it's valid, I'm going to update the progress time to 0, basically making sure we're clearing it out and removing it from the parent. If it's not valid, we don't need to do anything. It doesn't exist, right? Now, update interaction progress is basically going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to take this again. Whoops. Take these. If it is valid, we're going to update the progress time. Now, I don't want to do anything off of not valid. Just in case we get some kind of edge scenario where we are pressing the button, but we're not actually trying to interact with anything. We don't want to create the interact widget and display it because maybe there's nothing there to interact with. So if this is not valid, it should not do anything. Okay. That does lead to a bit of edge casing, where if you're like holding the interact button before you actually get the interaction widget popped up on the screen, it'll actually take your progress from this held, but that's just kind of something that happens with held events. If you really want to go through and edge out every single edge, that's totally up to you. I'm not too worried about it. I kind of like that the player can hold E for maybe a second before they actually walk up to the thing they want to interact with, and it'll have that second of progress instead of making them hold it for 3 seconds every single time. That's all we're going to do here. Give it a caption, call it interact events. You could collapse if you really wanted to. I don't want to. I'm going to leave it there. Oh, whoops. I guess we got to actually plug that in. Make sure the update progress time is being called from the interact widget. And that's all we're going to do here. So our player needs to call this when we interact. If you remember the last episode, we just kind of set this current interactable and did interact with it. But that's not how interactions are going to work. We're going to have to do a bunch of logic because there are a bunch of different things that we can interact with in the game, right? It's not all going to be the same thing. So I'm going to come off of my event begin play, and I'm going to go ahead and make a reference to my player controller, since I'm going to need it quite a bit with this game. So instead of casting to player controller, I'm going to cast to PC custom. And PC custom should be able to get this enhanced player subsystem just fine. I'm going to also promote this to a variable. PC custom. That way we always have a reference to our player controller. You'll probably also want to add is locally controlled here as well if you're doing multiplayer. I'm not too worried about it since we're not, but off of the event begin play, if you don't add locally controlled, it's going to run this multiple times for every single character. It's going to run it on your server and your client character, and it's going to be a giant mess. Okay, so now on our component begin overlap, we have our current interactable set. Well, we need to call our PC custom and display the interact widget. But we need some values here, right? We can't just display a blank message and no, you can't interact, or you can interact. We need a way to figure all this out. And we're going to do that through another BPI event. So our blueprint interface, we're going to get another value coming from our items. And I'm actually going to do something else first. I want to make sure that there's not already an interaction widget before I set this current interactable. So I'm going to get my PC custom and remove the interact widget. Just in case, again, there is an interact widget already and maybe I went over to something else, it's going to be ugly. It's just kind of a checksum here to make sure that there is not already an interact widget. And then we're going to set it to our current interactable. So I'll probably actually route this down. Just drag out, press R to route. Oh, it's a little bit cleaner. And now I need to use this current interactable actor, which is going to be any actor that we interact with in the game. So it's not necessarily just going to be the gathering node. It's going to be the vendors, it's going to be the chests, it's going to be the crafting tables, pretty much anything we can interact with. And I need to get some information from it. Right? Player interactions. We're going to open up that BPI interactions. And I need to make a function here, which is a getter, to I get get interaction data. Okay. This is going to return two things, which we'll actually have to make one of them. It's going to return two enumerators. One is going to be crafting type, and you'll see why we need this when we make the crafting benches later on. And the other one is going to be interaction type, and we're going to need to make that. So inside of our interaction here, we're going to make a new blueprint, enumeration, e_interaction type. And this is going to be the type of interaction that is being interacted with, just like it says. So you're going to need to put everything in your game that you can interact with into its own enumerator value here. I'm going to have crafting bench. I'm going to have gathering node. I'm going to have a storage chest. I'm going to have quite a few here, actually. I'm going to have a class giver or a quest giver, whatever you want to prefer to put in there. I'm going to have a vendor. VNDOR. And I'm going to have a banker. And that's all I'm going to have for this game. You're going to want to put basically any type of object you're going to interact with into here. That way you kind of have them all. So we're going to make this E_interaction type. And we're going to say interaction type. I'm going to make this in the category getters. That way it's nice and situated here. So now inside of our object, we don't actually need to do anything inside of our player for this because our player is not going to be interacted with. It's going to be interacting with. But inside of every object that we make that needs to be interacted with, we're going to have to set up this get interaction data function. So what interaction type is it? It's a gathering node. So this crafting type is going to matter later on when we do our levels and our classes. And this will determine whether or not the player can interact with it because the player will have the class that they need to have in order to interact with it. So we're going to need to get that crafting type somehow. We'll just go ahead and do that now. If you're not going to have classes, you don't need to worry too much about having crafting type in here. You'll probably delete it altogether. But I'm going to add another pure function in my items, in my BPFL custom, called get item, get crafting type. Doesn't really have to say item, just get crafting type is fine. And it's going to use this exact same thing. We're going to input the item ID, we're going to get the data table row, and we're just going to get crafting type and return that instead of display name. Boom, that's all we had to do. So now inside my gathering node, I can get the info, or not info, setup, item ID, and we're going to get gathering type, or get crafting type. And we're just going to pass that right into crafting type. Now you'll see that in our E crafting type, let's pull it up real quick. In our E crafting type, we only have the what we would consider crafting types, right? This is going to switch to gathering type. So the blacksmithing crafting type is going to equal the mining gathering type. So on and so forth for all of these. If you want to do it differently and set up actual gathering classes, then you're going to make that into probably a gathering type enum as well and add that to the data table. I just went ahead and used crafting type for both because it's a little bit easier to manage that way for me. That's just kind of a personal preference. So don't get too confused that we're using crafting type for a gathering node because this is going to equate directly to mining instead of blacksmithing. And then when we go to use the materials, it's going to take that item type and use that to filter for only the blacksmithing table. Only the blacksmithing materials are going to be used. So don't get too hung up on that. Okay, that is our get I interaction data, or I get interaction data. Gets the interaction type and gets the crafting type. So we're going to pull out of here and we're going to say I get interaction data. Okay, and that's going to pull the interaction data as a message straight from that. And I'm going to run a switch on interaction type. Because every type of interaction that I have is going to do something different from the rest. And you'll see as we get into that later on, some of them are going to need a lot of functionality, some of them aren't going to need much. Like bank. Bank is just going to be use bank. Right? Same thing with trade, right? Trader is just going to be trade. Storage chest is just going to be get storage chest, right? So we won't have to do too much with these ones. But other stuff where we are going to need crafting levels and all that data, we're actually going to have to write quite a bit of functionality. Now I'm not going to write that right now. I'll probably write that later on once we've actually implemented the class system and the inventory system, because we're going to need to check, like with this gathering node, which is the one we're going to write. I'll just route that over here so we have some space. We're going to need to run a few functions from our inventory component to see if it does have the inventory space, if we have our crafting level inside of our class manager, if we have the gathering level we need, or the class unlocked, or are we using classes at all. We're going to get all that information out basically when we interact with the node. So keep that in mind. We're only going to do one more thing to actually get this displayed on the screen. We're not worried about inventory size or any of that stuff yet. We haven't built it. So we're going to add another interaction here. This is going to be another getter. And this is going to be get item data. So I get item data. And this is so that our interaction message can properly display the item data that we're trying to interact with. Because, you might not want to interact with wood if you don't need the wood. You might want to walk up to it and say, okay, well, yes, I want to interact with this. No, I don't. So item ID, it's going to be the name. Quantity, so this is going to be the amount of the item that we set up in the item data when we put the item out into the world. It's going to be the amount that you would pick up. And a boolean for can harvest, because we need to know whether or not, again, this node is actually in the world or not. Okay, so same thing here, get interaction or get item data. We're going to take that item ID, put it in, take the quantity, put it in, and can harvest is going to be can interact. So if we can't interact with it, we can harvest it. If we can't interact with it, we can't harvest it. Okay. So from our player here, we're going to take our current interactable. Remember, we promoted this to a variable, and that's just so it's easier to see later on. We know that it's an item because we're coming off of the gathering node. So we're going to get the item data. And we're going to use that to display our interact widget. So we're going to format this. So we're going to append. I'm going to say gather x quantity of space of and then we'll add another space. Get display name. Boom. And can harvest is going to be can interact. So you're going to want to set that up basically kind of however you want to display your messages. We are going to need these values elsewhere, so they are not just for cosmetics. We're going to need the item ID to get a bunch of data from the data table row to see how many it could stack to, if we already have the item in our inventory, how many available slots we have for the item. All that stuff is actually going to come and combine with can harvest to actually give us this end value, but for now it's fine. We just put in gather X amount of whatever item we want and display the interact widget. So one more thing, we are almost done. Well, we need to actually have a way to interact with this item now. Okay, so you need to come up here somewhere where we have space and say input action interact. And that's that input action we made at the beginning of the video. And we need to do what's called a do once. So when this is triggered, we are going to do a do once. We're going to say do once. And that do once is going to need some information, okay? It's going to need a way to reset itself, and it's going to need to do some stuff. So we need to get our PC custom, and we need to update interaction progress. And we're going to do this on multiple different branches of this kind of string here. So ongoing is going to be the important one. We're going to take our elapsed seconds and put that into our PC custom update interact. This is going to let it update the interact progress as we are holding the button. That way the bar gradually fills, right? It's going to be nice and smooth. Off of our completed and our canceled. Okay, completed and canceled. So if we stopped holding the button or if we completed, we need to set that interaction progress back to 0 and reset our do once. And triggered is going to trigger after that 3 seconds is completed. It's going to trigger this. Okay, and that is going to get our current interactable, and we want to make sure this is still valid. If it's not valid, we're going to do other stuff with it. And say I interact. And now we're actually going to be picking the item up when that interaction widget, right, has been held for 3 seconds, or when that input action has been held for 3 seconds, as long as the interaction is valid. It's going to pick it up. So we need one more checksum here, because there is actually a non-zero chance that later on when we do all this stuff, the item that we are trying to pick up, maybe we'll have a full inventory, maybe we won't be a high enough level. So we are going to need to check something here to see if we can actually interact with this item or not. Just like in the item itself, we need a can interact value inside of the player to be set up. So for now, I'm just going to set that to true here, or I'm going to set that to whatever this is. But we will be changing this a lot later on when we have a lot more conditions, and ultimately checking it when we try to interact to make sure that, yes, we can, in fact, interact with this item before we go ahead and actually pick up the item, because what this triggers is literally picking up the item. It's not really triggering anything else. So we're going to get our PC custom here. Now we're going to remove that interaction widget. Whoops, not remove local player. Remove that interaction widget from the player screen, right? Because we've successfully picked up the item. We don't need that widget anymore. We're going to set can interact to false. That way this is always falsified when this is done running. Okay. So I know that probably wasn't a very good explanation here, but that is our whole interact event. And that is going to let us interact with items. We need to do one more thing here before we leave. So we're going to take our capsule component, on event end overlap. That way we are removing the object when we finish our overlap. Okay. So we're going to once again see if we're locally controlled. Again, you don't have to do this if you're not multiplayer. It's just something I like to do. I like to have it here for later so I don't get confused. Take our other actor, make sure it implements the interface. If that's true, if it does, we are done overlapping with it. So we walked away from the item. We need to run a custom event. Called clear interaction. And I'm going to make this a custom event because I'll need it in a few different places later on. But it's really not a complicated custom event here. It's just going to take our current interactable, make sure it's null, get our player controller, and remove the interaction widget. Okay. And that is all we are going to do on clear interaction. Okay, and that should now be displaying and clearing our interact widget. So let's go ahead and press play. And when I walk over this, we'll see that we can gather our 10 steel ore, or gather our 10 silver, and when we walk away, it clears it out. So if we hold E and wait our 3 seconds, boom, we picked up the iron ore, we pick up the steel ore, and we'll pick up the silver ore. Now if I walk away, guess what, I didn't pick it up. Boom. If I walk away, I can't pick it up. I'm not close enough. Now if I start holding E here, and I walk into it, like I said, it'll give you a little bit of leeway there. That's something that's totally up to you whether you want to change that or not. But for us, I think it's fine. If we walk over our iron ore, right, we can't interact with it because it's not interactable. But maybe you want to leave this message up. Maybe you don't want to leave this message up. You could branch out and just not create the interaction widget. But I want to leave this message up, that way I can see that this is where iron ore is going to respawn. That's kind of a personal thing if you're going to leave nubs around to respawn with. If you're not going to leave nubs around and you don't want to display that, just use this can harvest, and off of false, don't display this at all. Just say remove clear interaction, and it'll just remove it, you know? So that's totally up to you. Again, I like this here. This also works if, well, not really. Just know that if you don't want that there, you can just branch this and not display the interact widget. So totally up to you. If you don't like how the widget's set up, you know, go ahead and change your cosmetics. I'm gonna make mine a little bit smaller here. I didn't realize I made it so big. I don't like how big it is. I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller. Lower it down a little bit. And that's better. So yeah, that is our interaction event. So now that that is all set up, you should be able to interact with your items, with your gathering nodes, pick them up, and save that data, and load that data. So yeah, thanks for watching. In the next episode, we'll get more into the inventory component and start building out some functionality to actually get these items displayed inside of our player's inventory and saved up with inventory values. If you're enjoying the videos so far, I urge you to join our Patreon. For just $3 a month, you'll get access to all of the videos in this series as soon as I create them. Always available on Patreon, always free, and ready to go. You'll also get a copy of the example project so you can follow along step by step with a real visual guide in the project.